about our proposal and some of the questions that folks had coming in. So, the motivation for doing this work is really this storm that we have that's been around for years, which is, pediatric cancer is rare. We have siloed data. We don't have good standards. And, if you think about it, pediatric cancer is a really rare disease, which of course is great, but it makes it hard to study. Only about 1% of cancer cases are in kids. There's about 15,000 cases in the US each year. And so it makes it hard to collect data, which means that you have to work together, as you all know very well, to try to pull data together. But we're still stuck with all these arcane manual processes. In the middle is a shadow chart, which even in the 2022, almost every group I know still keeps shadow charts. We're still faxing information around. On the left are laptops, each one hooked to a different pharmaceutical company so they can enter it into their own bespoke system. You can see the passwords taped to the front of each one. So like that, the system is just not set up for success for collecting good data for trials. And then we're stuck with this, with a lack of standardization. Now, this is from one of the NIH's databases. And you can see that even when it comes to entering something as simple as as age, we can't agree how to do that. So how can you combine data sets and share data if we can't even agree on what to call a patient's age? So we're really out to fix this problem. And we think the way to fix these problems is to build data commons. And a data commons is simply put just a cloud-based place to put all of your different types of data, but it's not just a database. You're not just storing one type of data there. You want to store data that can connect to other data, and you want to have tools there so people can analyze the data and they don't have to download it to their own machines or develop their own analysis platforms. So we're seeing the emergence of these large data commons platforms, and we want to make it as easy as possible for researchers to use the data. Part of having a data commons is this common data language, this common core dictionary that I'll talk about. It helps solve this problem of the scarcity of data because you're putting it all in one place. It helps streamline how we can control who has access to the data, and we can make it really easy for researchers to get it. And then we can build in tools and workflows and really maximize the data that we collect from every child. Now, the goals of the Pediatric Cancer Data Commons that we built is to be a hub across all pediatric cancers and facilitate cross-disease research. We want somebody to come in and say, show me all the tumors with a MYC mutation, or show me all the tumors with an ALK mutation. And part of that is building this common core data dictionary. And we work with an international group, folks from all over the world. And I'll tell you a bit about the group we've put together. And then we have another goal, which is to increase data literacy. And that's through talks just like this one, because hopefully you'll go away from this talk understanding more about standards and why it's important for us all to speak the same data language. And we think if we promote this around the world to investigators and to everyone, that going forward, we're going to collect better data so we can share it better and we can do better research on it. The folks that use our data commons and the people that we engage include students. So we have lots of medical students and fellows and graduate students. We really want to target researchers, young investigators. We have a whole young investigator program trying to get new researchers to use our data commons. And we really want to push this out to the wider researcher community. We want our data to be available to anybody in the world who wants to use it. And then we really want to engage the community through meetings like this and through opportunities like this to get patients and families and survivors to see what's here and to understand the data and to help us promote the data and help us help be good advocates for the work that we're doing. We just work with clinical data, mainly demographics, lab values, tumor information, but we're taking in a lot of genetic testing information now, and I'll talk a little bit about that. What's really important to us is that we can link to data sets together so that if there's a genomic set of data out here and we have this really rich clinical data, we can link it together. We source most of our data from completed clinical trials. That's super high quality data, and I'll talk a bit about that, but we're increasingly now moving into collecting data from electronic health records and registries, and we hope to move into collecting data from patients and families as well. Most of our data are for pediatrics, but of course, it's really important now to be able to collect data on young adults, and we're even collecting data on some adults with cancer. This is just a very simple example to show you why the standards are important. And this is not a joke. This is how this is how business is conducted now. People make data collection forms and they'll just assign a number to a value, like 1 is male and 0 is female, or they'll flip it, or they'll use a letter. And then you try to combine your data sets together and you're stuck because you don't have the same standard. So our team spends so much effort and time building data dictionaries where we all agree on the same descriptors, and then we map these to codes that are in the National Cancer Institute's thesaurus. So now there's no more ambiguity. You say, these are the 3 things we're going to have for biologic sex. Here are the 3 acceptable values. Here are the codes. And then once you get the international community to agree on this, then there's no more arguing over what goes into a form, because you've already decided the acceptable values. Now, we've done this through lots and lots of meetings. We used to go to have these in-person meetings, and then unfortunately we found out that we could be just as successful on Zoom meetings. So we no longer get to go to these fun locations to have these data dictionary meetings. But it's an iterative, painstaking process, and we have a whole team that works on building these dictionaries. This is just an example of what a dictionary looks like. I'll blow a little bit of it up here. So this is just showing, say, for sex, race, and ethnicity. Before we did this, this is for the germ cell tumor group. Before we did this, you know, it was every group had their own set of values. And so we spent a lot of time working with the group to come up with a standardized set of values that everybody could agree upon, so that going forward, data can be collected in this new way. And we can take old data that were collected on trials and we can harmonize it to this new standard. And again, linking to these codes is absolutely important to us, because it allows us to remove any ambiguity around what something's called or where the information is at. Now, we are bringing in molecular information. Here are some of the molecular targets that we've identified that these groups have told us are important for rhabdomyosarcoma, for neuroblastoma, for AML. You can see the AML group got carried away a little bit, but that's okay. These are all important genetic defects for AML. And we're working with every group to understand exactly which genetic markers are the most important, so we can build them into the dictionary, so we can be collecting those. And then we have a whole process for expanding the dictionary. If somebody wants to add in a new genetic marker, we can add that in and we can start collecting data on that marker. So we have a lot of experience now understanding the requirements of each community and how to expand the dictionary to accommodate their needs. This process is iterative. I'm not going to spend too much time here, but it takes months and months to build these dictionaries. We have a whole team of project managers and data scientists that work on building these. We start with the case report forms and we harmonize them. And then we have these meetings one after the other to get the groups to agree on what goes into the dictionary. We then take what's in the dictionary and we decide what's the most important. So we tier them. And this is important because the statisticians can't give us everything. It's too much work to harmonize 600 data elements, say, for a data set. So we go through and we come up with a tiering system, so we know which ones are the most important. We harmonize the data, and then we have a huge quality control process where we go through and we verify and validate the data. We make sure it's of high quality. We do internal and external consistency checks. We make sure that, for instance, you can't have a metastatic site listed if it's listed as a stage 1 tumor, because that would be a collision. You can't have stage 1 with a metastatic site. So this is just an example of some data that we did QC on, showing our stoplight, coding, and then we can send the data back to the group that submitted it if it doesn't meet the quality control criteria. We want everything in the commons to be highly curated, super high quality data, so that when it's used for research, the researcher has confidence about the data quality, the data provenance, the data lineage, and so forth. This is our leaderboard. It's on our website. It shows that we've gotten to a pretty good state for 10 of the groups that we work with. So it's cancer predisposition and then the other 9 cancers listed here. We've built some version of a data dictionary for both. We've gotten data contributors committed from around the world. And you can see that we're just now starting to get the data to pour in on these tumors, and we're getting lots of papers published. And to us, that's one of the biggest signs of impact, is we now have seen over 50 papers published between germ cell neuroblastoma and our soft tissue sarcoma commons. The main limiting step these days actually is the harmonization of the data. It's the statistical work in getting the data harmonized. We work with groups from all over the world. Highlighted in red here are the groups that we're working with that concentrate on bone tumors. We've put in data sharing and use agreements with groups both in the US, Europe, and Asia, and working on groups in South America as well. We've been able to, we have a full-time governance person, and she just spends her time working on the contracts, making sure that we can take data from these groups and put it together, make sure that we have identifiers so we can update it. It's a lot of work conforming to all of the national and international requirements for data sharing, but we seem to have a very repeatable and scalable process now. About a year ago, we finally formally formed our Hibiscus Consortium, or Hibiscus, which is the bone tumor consortium. I'm sure you'll recognize Katie's one of our co-chairs, along with two of our European colleagues. And then these are the 9 international groups that have committed to becoming part of this initiative with us. These groups have all been involved in the initial data dictionary work, and they've all committed to contributing data to the commons. This is not a very pretty list, but it's all the data that we've identified that is from completed clinical trials that we hope to get into our data commons once we get through the harmonization process. And again, these groups here represent the groups that were on the previous slide here that have committed to sharing data, and we have the data sharing agreements in place for many of these groups. We have about 30,000 cases in the commons between neuroblastoma and soft tissue sarcoma, and we're now starting to see a deluge of data now that all of the data sharing agreements are being put into place. We really hope to have 100,000 patients in the commons over the next year, and we certainly have the numbers planned to meet that goal. And I think that that given the right resources for harmonizing the data, we should be able to make that goal. We have all of these individual disease commons, but we now think of it more as a one large data commons. And as I said in the very beginning, we want researchers to be able to search over all the data. So it's very important to us to have governance over over all the data. We have a scientific advisory committee we just launched. We're going to be launching an external advisory board this year, and then we're going to hopefully in the next year launch a parent and family council. And we would love your advice on some of the best ways to think about how to involve families and other advocates. This is our scientific advisory committee. You can see we have Katie's on there, Stephanie Hecker's on there as well from Germany, and then we have folks from all of our different consortia or cooperative consortia on the scientific advisory committee. The external advisory board is very cool. It's made up of people that have nothing to do with pediatric cancer. So that's been fun, trying to get people on the EAB that can just advise us on international data sharing. For instance, we have the chief medical officer from Delta Airlines on there. So somebody who deals with big data, but isn't necessarily part of the pediatric oncology community. So that person can help give us advice on international data sharing issues. Anybody in the world can request data. We have a process in place where you can go through the tool and look for data, and then you can request it. And then once your data request is approved, we give out the data, and then you can use it for research. The different consortia have slightly different rules, but for the most part, the process is the same across the board. These are just some of the papers from the last year. These are all on our website. And again, we're very proud of the work that people are doing now using this harmonized data from the commons. So the link to the slides is at the bottom here. You can all download the slides. It's on every slide. This is actually a link to our cohort discovery portal, so you can play around with it at your leisure. I didn't want to take people's time to do a live demo, but the cohort discovery tool lets you see a high-level view of all the data in the commons. So this is looking at our neuroblastoma and rhabdomyosarcoma commons. It allows you to do a very faceted search. So you could say, show me all the patients that have a FOXO1 PAX3 mutation, for instance, and then it allows you to request those data. Now, one of the things we're very proud of is that we can connect to other data sources. So in this case, we can connect to the genomic data commons. And if you, this is a new feature which we haven't released yet, but you'll be able to click connect, and it'll send you over to the genomic data commons, and it'll pop open the same cohort of patients. And ultimately, we plan on having a place for people to put their data together and do their analysis so they don't have to download the data. And this is really going to be revolutionary, because the clinical data that's in a resource like the genomic data commons can be pretty stale. It could be the data that were collected 5 years ago or 10 years ago. We have updated outcomes on our patients so that we can connect really rich clinical data to the genomic data and make it much more useful. We're also going to be releasing some analytic tools in the next few months, like you can do survival curves and other things in the browser. And this will allow investigators to do some hypothesis generation so that before they request the data, they can try to see, try to find trends and try to think of better things to, new ideas to study. There are other efforts in collecting data. We enjoyed reading about the Osteosarcoma project, which obviously you're a big part of. And we're really looking forward to working together because these are very different but complementary efforts. We're fixated on high quality curated clinical trials data, but we'd love to connect to other data sources and help enrich those data sources as well. So if the Osteosarcoma project is collecting these samples for germline data, if we can get data to connect to patients that are in the PCDC, then we can actually enrich those data. But for me, the exciting thing is that the Osteosarcoma project has spent so much effort on outreach to families. That's something that we really want to focus on for some various efforts in terms of long-term follow-up and helping patients who are survivors get access to their data when they grow up so they have access to their information. So I think there's a lot of synergy here between the way our groups could work together. A few minutes on Gearbox, which is our clinical trials matching platform. One of the big problems we have is, we'll see a child in clinic and the child will have a relapse of their, in this case, AML, and we don't really have anything on hand to treat them with that's novel. So we'll use some sort of holding chemotherapy, which, then puts them on that therapeutic regimen for the next couple of weeks, sometimes months, while we're trying to find a trial to get them on. So the Leukemia and Lymphoma Society approached us about building out a clinical trials matching platform for kids with AML, with the goal of getting a kid on a study within 24 to 48 to 72 hours. And so we built Gearbox designed to help get a kid on trial within 1 to 3 days. And we've just released the first version of Gearbox for AML, and we're really excited to expand this out to other tumor types. When you download the slides, you can have a link to the Gearbox platform so you can play around with it and see how it works. But in general, you can log in to the platform and it will show you a long list of potential factors on the left, the patient's disease, their liver function tests, anything that could be part of a clinical trials criteria. And on the right will be a list of trials. And as you add in the various factors, the trials will sort into matched, undetermined, and non-matched. And if you pick a study, we'll give you more information about that study, who to contact, how to get on the trial, and so forth. So we've released the first version for AML because this was a sponsored project by Leukemia and Lymphoma Society. And we're super excited now to expand this out to other tumor types, including osteosarcoma. There are a lot of trials in clinicaltrials.gov, which is where we get our information. Just looking at osteosarcoma studies that can enroll children that are recruiting right now, there's 118 in ct.gov. Now, I didn't go through carefully to see which ones are redundant, but there are a fair number of studies, and this number is going to be increasing, hopefully quite rapidly as more and more pharma companies are racing to do more drug development and trial development for pediatric age groups, as well as lowering the age of enrollment for studies that have been traditionally for adults. So we get all of our clinical trials data from clinicaltrials.gov, and we parse out all the criteria, and that's how we built Gearbox. Now, right now, the clinician has to enter the things into Gearbox, but we're already planning our next version, which is going to leverage electronic health record data, going to leverage data directly from places like Foundation and Tempus and Children's Oncology Group. And then we're also working on a plan to help build a centralized navigator for patients so that even once they match the trial or figure out that they might be a match, they know who to contact or they know who has more information, because even that can be a stopping point for patients and physicians, is not knowing who to contact next. So building out that next step is really important to us as well. And as we do this for osteosarcoma, we want to make sure that we have a really good navigator in place so that as kids, if a child relapses or wants to go on a study, we know exactly where to send that person for more information. So,
sorry, Dr. Singh, can you just clarify how though this Gearbox is different from just a search on clinicaltrials.gov? Is it because
it's a great question.
Yeah,
so right now it's basically just a calculator. So there's nothing in Gearbox today that you couldn't get by spending 4 or 5 hours downloading all the trials, parsing out the inclusion exclusion criteria, trying to figure out which criteria would be part of a match. So the first iteration is really just a clinical decision support tool. It won't be the version 2 that we're planning will really be I think something that's never been done before, which is, can we pull information in on these patients automatically, so the clinician basically just has to enter a few things, but that the matches are already there. The other thing we're planning on doing is having a per trial view, so that the clinician can say, hey, I want to get my kid on this, this particular trial. They can click the trial and it'll show them all the criteria quickly, and so they can check off which ones that they need to meet to get onto that trial. But that was a great question. That's a very astute observation. I'm actually done. So these are our part of our mission. We want to connect folks, and I think I convinced you that connecting folks around the world is really the key to doing this. But really, it's the sharing, the trust and sharing that has really made a difference over the last couple of years. And when we first started doing this, people said, "Oh, you're never going to get those folks to work together. You're never going to get the U.S. and European groups to work together." And we've never had a problem with this. Every group ends up wanting to work together, building these consensus models and helping to get better data for research. Our team's about 20 people, I think maybe 21 now. It's largely made up of developers and data science, data experts in standards, and then of course a very solid project management core, which helps keeps everybody honest and keeps everybody on their toes. So we're very excited about this work. We're super excited to work with you guys. We think building out the data dictionary for osteosarcoma and then expanding it to include molecular elements and building out Gearbox is going to be revolutionary for these kids. But I'll stop there, and I think we should have plenty of time for discussion since I talk so fast.
You did do a really good job talking really fast and getting a lot of info in there in a pretty short amount of time. So thank you. Anyone have any questions? You can throw them out or put them in chat.
I'll put the link. I'll put the link to the slides there and
Great.
my email in case anybody wants to.
Thank you. Here, I'll do. Oh, I see someone's hand is up.
That's me, Christina. It's
Okay.
Rob.
Hey, Rob.
Go ahead, Rob.
Hey, Dr. Sam. Thank you for sharing your information tonight. And I ended up jotting down a number of questions.
Great.
The first one that I think your bullet point sort of alluded to it, but I was curious if what you're looking to do will allow for your database to be able to ultimately communicate with the electronic health records or EHR systems that are out there to not only gather data, but to gather potential patients that may be able to align to clinical trials.
Yeah, that is definitely so right now we're working on a clinical trials EHR, we're working on an EHR data extraction project where we want to use some of the more modern tools to extract data right from the electronic health record. That is something which is going to obviously enrich the data in our commons. It's because I took out a whole set of part of my slides which talk about why clinical trials data leaves a lot to be desired compared to the rich data, which you obviously know is much richer than clinical trials data. But the idea that you're talking about, which is looking over a population of data to try to find a match for a trial, is actually a very interesting prospect, because if a drug company says, listen, we have this trial, we'd like to find matches from around the country, then you want to be in a position to say, here are the 20 kids at the 15 sites around the country who are potential matches. That would be a dream to be able to do that. We're certainly set up to do the data pulls and to store the data. The issue there is then going to be one of consent for pulling the data and trying to get the data out. Now, the Osteosarcoma project is tackling that by going directly to families, and we're very interested in that idea. I think that time has come for sure, but still to get into the EHRs to get directly do this, I think would be a challenge, but would definitely be worth it.
So disclaimer, I do work for a pharmaceutical company. But outside of that, I know you had referenced minorities as well in your presentation, and I know that there's a challenge, obviously, getting minority participants in clinical trials. Mm-hmm. However, I think our families that are affiliated with oncology and osteosarcoma in particular, they probably aren't as probably averse as some of the others because they want any opportunity for their family to be able to benefit. My second question, there was one was about the male female, and I know we're getting into a situation where there are people that don't ascribe to being, non-binary patients. Can your system, are you planning that into your
Yeah.
system?
So that actually, I didn't talk about it on that slide, but the reason I had that slide in there, because it's from a good story. So for the first 5 years, we had male, female, and unknown in our data dictionary. And then the germ cell tumor group came along and said, hey, that's not going to cut it for us. We need these two other sexes in our biological sex. And we said, oh, okay. So we had to expand our dictionary to include what the germ cell tumor group needed. And so we have a change control process put in place where the data dictionary, somebody can put a request in to change the dictionary. We add the elements, we audit it, of course, so that anytime you get data, you know exactly what the version was when you got the data. But we're very well set up for changes in the dictionary. We just went through this with neuroblastoma because they wanted to add in a bunch of genomic markers. And so we had to go through a whole change control process with them. Back to your other point as well, the issue of diversity and equity in clinical trials is really interesting because you're right, the cancer community has been better about better diversity on trials, and yet there still remains a survival inequity that we see across races. And so we need to make sure that we can try to collect enough data to answer those questions. The other thing, I know that this is not part of today's presentation, but I took out my global slides. It's an amazing fact to me that most of the kids in the world who die of cancer are never diagnosed with cancer. And 90% of the childhood deaths from cancer in the world are in low and middle income countries that have no access to even diagnostics. So part of our mission, and I didn't want to dilute the talk today with it, but part of our mission is to bring standards to these other areas of the world and bring better ways to collect data. And if anybody's interested in hearing more about that work on a separate thread, I'm happy to talk with people offline about that. So thank you for bringing that up.
No, you're welcome. One final question. Sorry to monopolize this, but with regard to the databases, so osteosarcoma is not part of your initial Gearbox profile right now. Will your databases from the different cancers look for commonalities? Is there a way that you're going to mine data from the different research that takes place for, say, rhabdosarcoma, et cetera, where we may find maybe faster a connection where your data will supply information that says, hey, for this osteosarcoma patient, they may have a profile that matches something that really was effective, but was in use treating rhabdosarcoma or some other.
Yeah, I'm so glad that there's the pharmaceutical person in you speaking up there, because I love this idea and the whole idea of like, the whole basket trial concept of, somebody coming in and saying, you know what, I want to study ALK mutations, and it doesn't matter to me if it's in neuroblastoma or if it's in small cell lung cancer or if it's in, rhabdo. That to me is the dream of connecting these together, is to allow somebody to do research over multiple tumor types and make inferences that they never would have made. When we started doing this, the silos were so strong that I'm still introducing people in the children's oncology group who work on one disease to another disease, people that I assume know each other. So I think we're finally breaking down those barriers. And to your point, I think we're going to learn a lot by allowing people to search over tens of thousands of patients across multiple diseases.
Thank you.
Those are great questions. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. That's all I've got for the moment.
Any other cues coming in here? I have one while you guys are thinking about it. So in some of your slides, you showed for some of, well, actually, sorry, two-part question. You could talk about of the diseases that you've already started with, which are furthest along, and if you could maybe kind of give us a sense of how those are being used to date.
Sure.
And then the second part of that is, I noticed in some of the slides that you had like number of subjects, number of studies, number of like molecular records. And so what are you thinking? Like, what's the size we're thinking about for osteo? And is that, you also had a slide where you looked at like what were the current trials in clinicaltrials.gov, and are we looking at all like, trials from the past 5 years, 10 years, or just trials that are there today?
Sure. Yeah, those are good questions. So, the furthest along, the first one we did in 2014 was neuroblastoma, and then following on the heels of the success with that one, rhabdomyosarcoma wanted to come online. So, and then germ cell tumor. I would say those three are the furthest along. And if you go on our website, of the 50 papers that we list on there, most of those are from those three tumor types, just because those data have been there the longest. But we're now starting to see requests for other types of data. And as soon as we get our first sets of osteosarcoma data in there, we should be able to start to fulfill data requests for osteosarcoma. The clinical trials that we're pulling, we want to make any trial that is available seen in Gearbox. And right now we're told that clinicaltrials.gov has most of the trials in there. Even the European trials end up in clinicaltrials.gov. It was very gratifying. We had a researcher in Amsterdam tell us that when he runs his tumor board, they use Gearbox during the tumor board for their AML patients to help figure out which trials might be available for them. I had a slide showing the different completed trials. It's about 6,000 osteosarcoma patients. So that would be sort of the current load that we hope to start off with once we get these groups on. But we're talking to groups in other parts of Asia. We want to look at South America. We want to look at other parts of the world. So I would hope that 6,000 is just the start, and we can really build this up over the next few years to have tens of thousands of patients in there with bone tumors. Good questions.
Anyone else want to jump in with questions?
Quickly, this is just an idea or suggestion. I'm sure you guys have a lot of data sources, and some of these sources might be just somebody throws in a whole, like a disk of database to you, and saying, hey, here, go at it. And finding data scientists who can kind of parse the data is kind of difficult, especially with the scarcity of skills. Have you looked at maybe crowdsourcing or trying to connect people and saying, hey, here's my database, here's the data dictionary, can you do a conversion for us and stuff like that? Like trying to get as many people involved as you possibly can.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like you were listening in on our meeting this morning, because we were having this exact existential conversation about who's going to be harmonizing all these data. It's really hard to hire data scientists these days. I just saw a talk where they showed that there was a handful of jobs. Like a handful of applicants for like thousands of jobs. It's very hard to find data scientists, just like you said. So our approach is right now is to try to fund the local statisticians to do the harmonization, and then try to fund harmonization locally in our own group. But your idea is actually really interesting, and I hadn't thought of that, which is, could we find somebody who just believed in the mission, who had some spare cycles that wanted to work on the data with us, because it really is our bottleneck right now. We have thousands of patients' data that are just waiting to be harmonized. The other problem, I'll say, the other quirk of the system is that most of the time the groups that collect the data insist on harmonizing it. And the nice part of me says that's just because they care, but the not so nice part thinks it's just because the data might be a little bit messy in an Access database or something, and they don't have the easiest way to dump it out. So in a lot of cases, we're waiting for a local statistician to pull the data and harmonize it for us. But if you have other ideas around how we can try to either crowdsource or get access to the kind of statisticians we need, it's a skill set. They have to understand clinical trials. They also have to understand data mapping and ontologies and standards. But there are people out there that do that, and we'd love to be introduced to them if they're interested in helping.
Okay, I'm going to be looking into this whole, we're putting together kind of like a gig work type of tool where people can say, hey, I understand these things. I'm a data scientist. I have this many spare cycles. Some people can give free cycles to doing that. So let me research that a little bit, and maybe we can connect to see maybe you guys can use this kind of tool.
Oh, that's terrific.
To source people.
Perfect. Thank you. That's awesome. I'd love to learn more about that.
So I have a question just about the landscape in the databases out there, and about, if there's a sorting out going on right now, and there's going to be kind of one standard 5 years from now, and that you're one of many, or are you unique, and how do you compare to what else is out there, I guess.
Yeah, that's a great question. And I actually got asked this question on a talk this morning. And I never want to give the impression that we're trying to build one standard to rule them all, because that doesn't make any sense. What makes sense is being able to interoperate between accepted standards. So there's some very well accepted standards. There's FHIR, there's OMOP, there's SDTM, there's some very well ingrained standards that each have their own purpose. So if you're submitting to the FDA, you want to collect things in something called CDASH or SDTM format. If you're pulling from the electronic health record, you want to use probably HL7 FHIR. What's important though is that it's in a standard. Because then we have a summer student or a medical student. All he's doing is basically writing a Rosetta Stone for interconverting between standards. So if somebody comes to us with a set of data and it's in OMOP, we can easily convert it into our NCIT standard so that we can put it into our commons. What we're trying to get away from is the lack of standards, or somebody who makes up their own standard, the zeros and ones and the letters, and that's what we're getting away from. So I think our standard, we know that our standard has legs because the NCI is now using us to update their own database. And in fact, they're actually filling up their repository with our standards that is now going to power the next generation of forms for collecting data for trials. So it's very gratifying that way to have them come to us. In fact, we have a contract with the NCI now to harmonize data that's going to go into the National Cancer Institute's Commons because they see this foundational standards work that we're doing and how it fits into the landscape. So thank you for asking that. Thank you.
Just one other quick question. So in terms of this grant that we're talking about, and so if you don't get the grant, are we just going to take longer to get into the system, or do we move to the front of the line by? I mean, what will the grant facilitate? I guess specifically?
Yeah, we have some general funding for building data commons, and we have parts of people's efforts working on things. What a grant like this does is it really then identifies a person who wakes up every day and says, listen, I want to finish this osteosarcoma dictionary. I want to get these agreements in place. I want to build the molecular targets for osteosarcoma. I want to get Gearbox built out for osteosarcoma. It just speeds things up. We're still applying for lots of general grants, and we know that it just takes time. But a good example is we didn't even have a retinoblastoma commons on our mind, and then a group came to us and said, we want to fund a retinoblastoma commons. And within 9 months, we had the dictionary built, we had the agreements in place, we had the data set to come in. So it's that kind of sort of jumpstart that some of these groups need. And I think for osteosarcoma, we're really poised to, we've already built the sort of the V1 of the data dictionary. We're really poised to build this out faster now. I've never been asked that question before. That's a great one.
Any other questions?
Christina, who's going to be at the meeting?
A lot of these folks are going to be at the meeting.
Good.
So, yeah. So
I am too. I bought my plane tickets today, so I'm excited.
Terrific. So one question that came up a lot, I think, in our previous round of discussions is just wanting to make sure that the data is easily accessible and how it would be accessed. So you did show us the portal, some screenshots of that, but could you talk to that a little bit about accessibility, who would have access? And you had also mentioned people coming to you and asking for data. So if you can explain how that works.
So these data are de-identified. And so by any sort of, in the US at least, by HIPAA standard, they could be publicly available. There's no legal reason why we couldn't make the data available to anybody who came to the site and they could download it. If we did that, we would have 0 groups willing to work with us. And so we found out early on that the governance around doing this was one of the most important things. So every group, osteosarcoma included, has an executive committee. I showed some of the members, and that executive committee has come to an agreement on how they will evaluate data requests, how they will give out data, who gets to be on the paper, how the paper has to be, who has to be attributed, and so forth. Anybody in the world can apply for data. And the reason that these groups want to have some oversight is they don't want to have duplicative studies out there. So they want to make sure that if somebody proposes a study that somebody else isn't already working on it. And I think they want to have some handle on making sure that the science is good. So if you have a proposal and you come, you have to have a statistician, you have to have a plan, you have to say what you're going to do with the data. And I think that kind of oversight might seem onerous to some, but I think in the end, it makes for much higher quality papers that come out and makes for much higher quality data. So it's starting to happen now that we're seeing groups apply for data that really had nothing to do with the original data collection. And it's been interesting to bring in groups now that of course, the first people that apply are the ones that are in the group already. They know the data, they want just bigger, more data. But now it's really gratifying because we're seeing all the time now people coming in saying, I just saw your data comments, I'd like to request data. How do I do it? And so we point them to the process for getting data. But it's meant to be a public resource that anybody can ask for.
Any other questions? We have a couple more minutes. Yeah, go ahead, Rob. Oh, you're on mute.
So to build on that last question, unfortunately, our daughter passed away last year, but through her almost 7 years, we did resource a lot of physicians and opinions from around the country. So for a family, could their pediatric oncologist, would they on the flip side be able to have one of their staff members go in and look at your data and try to match it up to an existing patient?
Yeah, that's a really great question. This has been asked a couple times. It's sort of like a patients like me kind of thing. Could somebody go in there and say, here are some broad facets about the patient. What other patients are in there that meet these same criteria? That would at least allow you to see what the outcomes were on what they were treated on. And so that might provide some useful information. You could do that today. I mean, you could go in and say, I have this stage and this grade and these things, and it will show you how many patients are there. And one of the things we could consider doing is avoiding the data request process, but just letting the person see the outcomes for those particular patients, or like a specialized function, like a patients like me function. So that's an interesting idea. And I bet that from a governance standpoint, that wouldn't be difficult to do. So that's a really interesting idea. And then that would at least give you some information about here's what they were treated, here's the arm of the study they were on, and here's what their outcomes were. So that's a great idea.
The only other thing I would suggest that you might add if you haven't thought of it yet. So Victoria had Down syndrome, and she was only one of, I believe, 3 or 4 that had osteo and Down syndrome. So you might want to consider putting even specific markers for those that you're collecting data on around whether or not they have a certain chromosomal anomaly.
Yeah, and certainly for like germ cell and AML, we have an extensive set of other of syndromes. I don't think we have that in osteosarcoma, and that is a good point that we can raise with the executive committee to make sure that they're paying attention to other syndromes. The other group we work very closely with is one you've probably heard of, is the Gabriella Miller Kids First Data Initiative, and they're collecting data on structural birth defects and cancer, and we're now connecting to their data and enriching their data with our clinical elements. So we'll have a lot of information on associated syndromes as well. So, but that's a great point. Thank you.
You're welcome.
All right, any other questions out there? And thank you, Sam, for sharing your contact information. Hopefully you all see that in the chat. And so it sounds like everyone's welcome if they have a question to message you.
Anytime, and I guess I'll see some of you in less than 2 months.
Way less than 2 months.
Yes.
Yeah.
As I'm sure you're painfully aware. So, listen, it's super fun talking to you all, and please feel free to reach out if you have follow-up questions, or if you didn't want to ask them in the big group. And if you know people interested in working with us, or want to become part of the team, or just want to help talk to us, just please, we love outreach, and so just let us know who else we can talk to.
Great, and thanks for the slides too. The link actually was not working for me, and maybe if you wouldn't mind
I just tried it and it worked this very second. So can somebody else try it to see if it works?
Yeah.
Maybe
Can someone else test it? 'Cause-
they might have still been uploading when. you
Oh,
clicked.
maybe because I was, I would get it and then it would kind of disappear. Is anyone else having that problem?
No, the link worked.
And then if you just want to download it, instead of looking at it in the Dropbox browser, if you click this link, it'll just suck, it'll suck the
I'll
PDF.
have someone, it's a user error probably on my part.
That'll download the PDF right to your
Okay, great.
to your desktop.
All right. Well, thank you, everyone. Thanks for the time and thank you, Sam.
Yeah,
for joining
thanks
us
so much.
today.
Thanks so much,
It's a great
everyone.
overview. And
Looking
for all
forward
the
to see,
info, for all the slides and everything.
looking forward to seeing you all again. Thank you.
All right.
Okay.
Thanks so much. Good night,
All right.
everyone.
Bye bye.
Thank you very much. Bye.